Well, like him or loathe him, Tony Blair is back on the scene and he's got a lot to say. This week I sat down with him to talk Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn, Theresa May and his own troubled legacy. I think you'll probably have an opinion or two about this one. It feels like the first question to you after the election result has to be, are you still convinced that Brexit is going to happen?
I think it's possible now that Brexit doesn't happen. I think it's absolutely necessary that it doesn't happen because I think every day is bringing us fresh evidence that it's doing us damage economically, certainly doing us damage politically. And I think that when people really reflect on why we wanted to do Brexit or why the country voted for it, then they can see that in respect of the immigration issue, the overwhelming majority of these European migrants who come into our country are people we actually need for various reasons. So I think as this thing goes on, the cost-benefit analysis of leaving becomes very clear. And then the question really is, have we got the political leadership in the country to try and explain to people what the different options are and guide us in a different direction? So how would it come to a halt then? Would there be another referendum? Yeah, it's a really good question because, you know, you can obviously, I think public opinion is moving on it. Look, this time last year we were the fastest growing economy in the G7, we're now the slowest. Our savings ratio is at the lowest for 50 years. The investment community internationally has now gone really negative on us. Our currency's down 10, 12%. Investment in the motor car industry, for example, is down 30%. Living standards are stagnating. I mean, this is causing us real damage. That's beyond doubt. So the question is, in circumstances where the party leadership in both main parties is still committed to Brexit, how does it happen? And I think it happens if there is a strong movement for change out in the country that starts to impact on MPs. And you know how that happens, second referendum, votes in Parliament and so on. I think that, in a sense, you get to that later. The question is, can you get a clear sense from the people in the country that the will that they expressed last June is shifting? Do you think the Labour Party, with its current position of having a jobs-first Brexit, of having the best tariff-free access to the single market, to retain the benefits, is that deliberately deceptive? No, I don't think it's deliberately deceptive, but I think, for example, when people talk about tariff-free access, which is on the goods side, so you've got goods and services, tariff-free access on goods. Okay, you probably could negotiate that, but it's the non-tariff barriers that are the biggest problem. You're going to have customs checks. You're going to have rules of origin requirements. They're talking about multiplying by five times the number of customs checks and border checks we're going to have if we get out of the single market. Think of the cost and the bureaucracy. And on the service side, if you're out of the single market, and by the way, in services, we've got a huge surplus in trade with the European Union. If you're out of the single market, you're not going to get the same terms as you had in the single market unless you actually agreed to abide by all the European rules, in which case you might as well stay in it. So is Jeremy Corbyn providing an effective opposition then on Brexit? Well, I think the problem for the Labour leadership, both for Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, is very, very simple. That I think a lot of people supported us at this last election on the basis that voting Labour was a way of stopping Brexit or limiting the mandate of Theresa May on Brexit. And I think if we end up in a position where we're also for carrying forward Brexit and leaving the single market, I think a lot of those people will be saying, well, you know, I voted Labour because I thought I was going to stop these things, and actually the Labour leadership's in favour of them. So, you know, this is, again, a debate that's going to go on the Labour Party, as in the Conservative Party. My bigger anxiety is just what's happening to the country. So is Labour providing that opposition then? Well, I think Labour is providing the opposition up to a point, but I would like to see it go further. The issue is, of course, though, that Labour's position on Brexit seemed to work quite well in that general election. Were you surprised by the result? Yes, I was surprised by the result. I mean, I think on Labour's position working well in the election, I'm a little dubious on that, but okay, let's accept it for the purpose of argument. But the point is it can't last. I mean, at some point, we are going to have to take a definitive position. Are we in favour of staying in the single market, or which a large part of business and the trade union movement want us to do, or are we in favour of getting out? Now, the reason, by the way, why people hesitate in staying in the single market is that if we agree to stay in the single market, there's a very obvious next step in the argument, isn't there? Because then people say, well, in that case, why are we leaving Europe? But that's precisely why the question of changing Brexit, removing this distraction from our politics, concentrating on the big questions that are coming down the pipe at us, would be the best solution.
I'm keen to talk a bit more about that election result, because it does seem as though you got Jeremy Corbyn pretty much completely wrong. Just to look at some of the things you said about him previously, if Jeremy Corbyn becomes leader, it won't be a defeat like 1983 or 2015 in the next election. It will mean rout, possibly annihilation. You weren't just a bit off there, you were way off.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. So I think this election, by the way, was held in very unique circumstances. I actually think at the beginning of the election campaign, we were going to be routed. I think what happened was as much to do with the Tory campaign as our campaign. However, you know, I say this absolutely up front in the kind of essay I've written. I've got to pay tribute to his temperament during the campaign, to their mobilization, particularly of younger voters, to the way they fought the campaign, and they've generated a lot of enthusiasm. I completely buy that. What I don't buy is two things. First of all, I think a lot of people voted Labour, not because they thought he was about to be Prime Minister and Labour was about to win, but because they were horrified at the Tory campaign and wanted to put the brakes on it. And secondly, I think there will be significant numbers of people for sure voted for him with enthusiasm. I think there were an awful lot of people who voted for him because they couldn't stomach the Tories and wanted to make a point. And I'm sceptical myself that this is a coalition that's capable of holding, particularly if it becomes clear that we're really in the same position as the Tories on Brexit.
Do you think he'd be a good Prime Minister?
The doubts, you know, I expressed before, I haven't changed my mind on that. I think the problem with that old left programme is that it just doesn't meet the needs of the times. And the danger for the country, and look, it's all I do when I speak on these things is get a great shed load of abuse. So why am I doing it? I'm actually really worried about the country at the moment. I think if you follow up Brexit with a hard left economic programme, I mean, this country is going to be in real trouble. And you know, the fact is they aren't solutions. They're two different visions of the 1960s. When this country needs to work out an agenda for the future.
Another politician who's having certainly a bit of a hard time recently is Theresa May. Do you feel any sympathy towards her?
Yeah, I do, of course, because I know what it's like to do the job. And I think it's a very unsatisfactory situation where you've got the Prime Minister surrounded by people who are just waiting for the moment they decide to throw her off the ledge. I mean, I think there's something a little unseemly about all of it, really. And I do feel sorry for her, because I think, you know, she's somebody who has got the best interests of the country at heart. It's just that I profoundly disagree with her about Brexit. I understand why she thinks, look, the people have spoken, my job is to deliver that verdict. But I would just like to see more leadership and less followership.
Just to end, you're someone who always comes across as being remarkably self-assured, very self-confident in your own opinions and beliefs. But it's hard to escape the thought that you've been on the losing argument in most of the big political debates of recent years. Donald Trump, Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn. Does it ever cross your mind and you have that moment of self-doubt and think, you know, maybe I've got all this wrong. Maybe I'm not right on this.
You know, first of all, by the way, I've got continual self-doubt, which is what you should have if you're at all sensible about your politics. But I just point out, you know, my politics hasn't been on offer, actually, the last 10 years. I mean, you know, I know it often seems as if...
So you think if it had been, then you'd be on the winning side?
No, what I think is this, that I think that the type of politics that I represented, which was strong commitment to social justice and to social change. I mean, remember, we introduced the minimum wage, the Good Friday Agreement, we made massive investments in health and education. When I left office, health service satisfaction ratings were at the highest level for years and years and years. Yeah, but we were in favour of dynamic business and enterprise, right? I still think that has got real appeal. Now, I agree with you. You know, if you look back over these last years, particularly post the financial crisis, then you can say, look, that politics has had its day, and now what people want is the populism from the left or populism from the right. But then you look at France, and you see the victory of Macron, and you realise it's not as simple as that.
So could that happen in the UK, you think? A new centre-ground party?
Well, I'm not advocating new parties, but could it be that a politician, say from either of the two main parties, who was in that position, could they win? Yeah, they could win. And you know, one thing people forget is 2 years ago we had a general election in Britain, which David Cameron won pretty much from a centre-right position. So I agree with you. I think, you know, the politics that I represent is definitely under real challenge. The conventional wisdom is at the moment that centrism has, you know, has had its day and is passé, but I don't really believe that. And in any event, by the way, even if it's what people want to do, it doesn't stop me believing in it and believing it's sensible. And I do think if we end up in British politics, as I say, with these two competing visions of the past, they're visions of the past, they're not of the future, we'll just do damage to ourselves.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.